The Ballad of Casey's Billy Goat. You've heard of Casey at the bat and Casey's table d'ote, but now it's time to write the rhyme of Casey's Billy Goat. Pat Casey had a billy goat he gave the name of Seamus, because it was, the neighbors said, a national disgrace, and sure enough that animal was eminently famous for masticating every rag of laundry round the place. From shirts to skirts, prodigiously, it proved its powers of chewing. The question of digestion seemed to matter not at all. But you'll agree, I think with me, its limit of misdoing was reached the day it swallowed Mrs. Rooney's old red shawl. Now, Mrs. Annie Rooney was a winsome widow woman, and many a bouncing boy had sought to make her change her name, and living just across the way, 'twas surely only human. A lonesome man like Casey would be wishfully the same. So every Sunday, shaved and shined, he'd make the fine occasion, and he'd call upon the lady, and she'd take his hat and coat. And supping tea, it seemed that she might yield to his persuasion. But alas, he hadn't counted on that devastating goat. For Seamus loved his master with a deep and dumb devotion, and everywhere that Casey went, that goat would want to go. And although I cannot analyze a quadruped's emotion, they say the beast was jealous, and I reckon it was so. For every time that Casey went to call on Mrs. Rooney, beside the gate, the goat would wait with woefulness intense, until one day it chanced that they were fast becoming spoony, when Seamus spied that old red shawl a-flutter on the fence. Now, Mrs. Annie Rooney loved that shawl beyond all rhyme or reason, and maybe 'twas an heirloom or a cherished souvenir, for judging by the way she wore it season after season, it might have been as precious as a product of cashmere. So Seamus strolled towards it, and no doubt the color pleased him, for he biffed it and he sniffed it as most any goat might do. Then his melancholy vanished, and a sense of hunger seized him as he wagged his tail with rapture as he started in to chew. "Begorrn, you're a daisy," said the doting Mr. Casey to the blushing widow Rooney as they parted at the door. "Wid your tenderness and tazen, sure you've set me heart a-blazing, and I'll dread the day I never see my Annie any more." "Go on now wid your blarney," said the widow softly sighing as she went to tug his whiskers, when dismay her bosom smote. Her old red shawl 'twas missing, where she'd left it bravely drying, and she saw it disappearing down the neck of Casey's goat. Fiercely flamed her Irish temper. "Look," said she, "the thieving devil! Sure, he's made me shawl his supper. Well, I hope it's to his taste, but excuse me, Mr. Casey, if I seem to be uncivil, for I'll never wed a man with such a misbegotten baste." So she slammed the door and left him in a state of consternation, and he couldn't understand it till he saw that grinning goat. Then with eloquence he cussed it, and his final fulmination was a poem of profanity impossible to quote. So blasting goats and petticoats and feeling downright sinful, despairfully he wandered into Shinnigan's shebeen, and straightway he proceeded to absorb a mighty skinful of the deadliest variety of Shinnigan's potheen. And when he started homeward, it was early in the morning, but Seamus followed faithfully a yard behind his back. Then Casey slipped and stumbled, and without the slightest warning, like a lump of lead, he tumbled right across the railway track. And there he lay serenely and defied the powers to budge him, reposing like a baby with his head upon the rail. But Seamus seemed unhappy, and from time to time would nudge him, though his prods of protestation were without the least avail. Then to that goatish mind maybe a sense of fell disaster came stealing like a scepter in the dim and dreary dawn, for the bleat of warning blended with the snoring of his master in a chorus of calamity. But Casey slumbered on. Yet, oh, that goat was troubled, for his efforts were redoubled. Now he tugged at Casey's whisker, now he nibbled at his ear, now he shook him by the shoulder, and with fear becoming bolder, He bellowed like a foghorn, but the sleeper did not hear. Then up and down the railway line he scampered for assistance, but anxiously he hurried back and sought, with tug and strain, to pull his master off the track, when sudden in the distance he heard the roar and rumble of a fast approaching train. Did Seamus faint and falter? No. He stood there stark and splendid. True, his tummy was distended, but he gave his horns a toss. By them his goathood's honor would be gallantly defended, and if their valor failed him, he would perish with the boss. So dauntlessly he lowered his head, and ever clearer he heard the throb and thunder of the continental mail. He would face that mighty monster. It was coming nearer. He would fight it. He would smite it, but he'd never show his tail. Can you see that here's-to hero standing there in tragic glory? Can you hear the Pullman porter shrieking horror to the sky? No, you can't, because my story has no end so grim and gory. For Seamus did not perish, and his master did not die. At this very present moment, Casey swaggers hale and hearty, and Seamus strolls beside him with a bright bell at his throat. Well, the recent Mrs. Rooney is the gayest of the party, for now she's Mrs. Casey, and she's crazy for the goat. You're wondering what happened? Well, you know that truth is stranger than the wildest brand of fiction, so I'll tell you without shame. There was Seamus and his master in the face of awful danger, and the giant locomotive dashing down in smoke and flame. What power on earth could save them? Yet a golden inspiration. To gods and goats alike may come, so in that brutish brain a thought was born. The old red shawl. Then rearing with elation, like lightning, Seamus threw it up and flagged and stopped the train.